Well, welcome, and this is another Energion Politics moment. I'm talking with Chris Eyre, who is from the UK, who is going to be explaining to our poor American viewers how you can change governments so quickly without even having an election in the middle of it. Not even a minor little election going on. Americans aren't used to that sort of thing. So what's happening first, and then explain how it works.
Okay, well, what's happened is that following the Brexit vote, David Cameron said he was stepping down as Prime Minister by September, which gave the Conservatives time to go through their usual procedure for electing a new leader. And they have spent about a week going through the initial stages, which all took place between MPs. Whittled it down to two candidates, and one of them withdrew, which leaves us with only one candidate, at which point Mr. Cameron said, okay, there's no need to wait until September. I'll resign on Wednesday, and Theresa May can take over from that point. Which was a surprise to us here, and I suspect it's been an even bigger surprise from your side of the pond. What happens then is that if you want the absolute technicalities, Cameron will go and resign in front of the Queen, who technically appoints. Theresa May will have the next appointment with Her Majesty and say, I am the new leader of the Conservative Party, which is the majority party in Parliament. I can form the new government. And Her Majesty will say, that's fine, go off and form it. And she at that point becomes the new Prime Minister. She will then need to select her choice of ministers, but any ministers that Cameron has had in place will continue until she does it. So suddenly we've got a new head of the executive of the government.
Okay, so just for then American benefits, part of what's going on here is the fact that the Queen is the head of state.
Yes.
And the Prime Minister is has the executive function, the head of the government, which would be executive. Whereas in the United States, our president is both head of state and effectively head of government, which in parliamentary systems, those two are divided.
Indeed. I mean, the Queen is a notional head of state. She has no real power, apart from the fact that, in theory, the executive function is the Queen's, and she delegates it to the Prime Minister. If she were ever to decide not to delegate it to the Prime Minister, the monarchy would probably last about 24 hours. So in practice, I think you can say that the Prime Minister is head of the executive as well. That, of course, means that the Prime Minister needs to be a member of Parliament. It used to be the case that you could actually have a Prime Minister from our House of Lords, but there hasn't been one of those since the early 20th century, and it wasn't a great success then because the powers of the House of Lords were being progressively eroded, and it's continued since. And what you need to do is to be in control of what happens in the House of Commons, and you can't do that from outside it. How your president manages absolutely beats us, but there you are.
Well, for American viewers, there's quite a large number of countries that do this. For example, a lot of Americans would be quite shocked to realize that Queen Elizabeth II is also the Queen, say, of Canada and Australia, and exercises the power of Chief of State through the Governor General. who technically, again, as you said, appoints the prime minister. And I believe in Canada and Australia, it would be the same thing as you said. If the governor general decided to try to exercise executive power, on behalf of the Queen, that would last, as long as it took Parliament to say no.
Pretty much. Yeah.
But that's why that can carry on, is in countries that really have been independent for a very long time, is that that function has been that way. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but really there is no law that has been passed that, say, moves the executive power from the Queen to the Prime Minister. That's been more of a traditional development that is, really it almost effectively almost has the force of law because it's become such a tradition.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you have a constitution. We also have a constitution, but it's an unwritten one. It largely consists of understandings of that sort. That does mean that you can't take hours to the courts and argue over it very easily. But in practice, for things like that, it has the same kind of force as your constitution would have.
Okay, well, that's really the interesting thing. I'd like to hold for a future video interview with you, Chris, the difference between, say, the function of the Privy Council as I guess, the final court of appeal versus the powers of the Supreme Court, because that's also an area where the American viewers would probably not understand the UK system.
I would like to mention one other thing, and that's that this is all flowed out of the slightly peculiar system that Conservatives use to choose their leader. Their system is that you will have as many candidates as are MPs and can get the backing of a reasonable number of other MPs. They all throw their hats in the ring, and then you have a set of rounds of voting purely between Conservative MPs who whittle it down to a choice of two. That is then put to the whole Conservative membership to choose which one it actually is at the end of the day. None of the other parties in this country have the same system. So, for instance, had it been a Labour Prime Minister, it would have had to go to the membership. The same with Liberal Democrats, the same with Scott Nat. If Scott Nat could ever form a government, which of course they couldn't because they only stand in Scotland. So it's a peculiarity of the Conservative system that you can get a change without any form of election, other than one conducted between MPs.
It's an interesting question, I guess, that brings up that I wanted to ask and I'd forgotten about is, I wonder how the Conservative membership feels about being left out. If I was looking at this, not knowing the rules, and one of the two candidates selected by Parliament, because there were more than two, by the Parliamentary Conservative Party, my initial thought I would have almost assumed that what you would do is select another candidate and then let the party membership vote. Whereas now when the second candidate dropped out, the party membership is left out. How does the party membership feel?
Quite a few of them feel aggrieved that they haven't had a chance to vote. I think it would be a lot more of them were it not for the fact that Theresa May is seen by a lot of the membership as the nearest thing the Conservatives have had since to Margaret Thatcher, who is still really loved by a large number of the Conservative faithful here. And they look back to the days of Margaret Thatcher's government with longing and nostalgia. Had it been somebody less well known, I suspect the uproar would have been much more considerable. All the other parties, of course, think that we should have had a general election to decide this. But at the moment, the Conservatives still have a majority in the House of Commons. It remains to be seen how well Theresa May can get unity between the Conservatives. She actually was in favour of remaining, and obviously we're now, at least in theory, committed to leaving the European Union, and some Conservatives have criticised her for that, saying that she isn't going to be capable of giving herself wholeheartedly to negotiating leaving Europe. However, she will probably give a very good account of herself in any negotiations. She comes over as a very tough lady.
Well, I guess then the system is saved by the fact that it happened to pick somebody that most of the membership was okay. If it had happened to do something else, you might have another serious problem in UK politics.
I think we would have, yes. We've got enough of those on our hands anyhow, because at more or less the same time, there was actually a formal challenge for the leadership of the Labour Party from a lady called Angela Eagle, who you will no doubt hear more about in future.
Okay. Well, we got plenty of topics to talk about. Now I just need to find myself somebody from Japan to tell us about their election, which sounds pretty interesting, right? Too, from what little I've read about it. But there we are. And that's a whole other political system.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, and hopefully this will help some Americans understand what's going on.
Very welcome.